Hi, this is Scott Shulin. Today we're going to be talking about the Avalokitesavara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. I got to start off by saying there was about 4 people yesterday that we were listening to the simulcast, and there was some problems of them not hearing the simulcast. They could see it, but they couldn't hear it. And to do these things requires 2 or 3 computers, and they've got to be talking to each other. And we have one that is a PC and the rest are Macs, and sometimes they don't communicate too well, but we've got this sorted out. So, I apologize to anybody that was there trying to hear and could only see. So let's start today. Let's redo this remade, remodeled class about Avalokitesavara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. The Avalokitesvara first appears in the Lotus Sutra, chapter 25, which is called the Gateway, the Universal Gateway of Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva. And in this passage, the Buddha describes him as a compassionate Bodhisattva who hears the cries of sentient beings and works tirelessly to help those who call upon his name. The Buddha talks of 33 specific manifestations of Avalokitesvara, including female manifestations. The thing that we're going to hear for the next few slides is that it's very important to realize that Avalokitesvara comes to you in a way that is going to be the easiest and most beneficial for you to understand. Actually, gender with this deity and with all deities, in fact, it really doesn't matter because they're empty of inherent existence. It's the form that we give them to help us understand and to learn. The word Avalokitesvara, it can be broken down. Ava equals look down, Lokit, behold, observe, Ishavara, Lord, rule. Now when you put this together in the Pali Sanskrit order, it would be the Lord or ruler who looks down and observes. Now, we talked a little bit ago about about Avalokitesvara in the Lotus Sutra. In the Heiyuan Sutra, Avalokitesvara transforms himself into forms that suit the nature of those to be helped. His manifestation of transformation bodies are countless, they're innumerable. And in the sutra it talks about if a boy or girl is about to gain some enlightenment, Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva transforms himself into a boy or girl. If a monk is about to attain enlightenment, Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva transforms himself into a monk. In short, he can appear in a myriad of different ways, and I think they bring this up over and over again so people can understand and be flexible with how they view the deity. We're going to talk in this class about basically 3 distinct forms that are well known that Avalokitesvara manifests as. We're going to be talking about the in India, Avalokitesvara. We're going to be talking about Kwan Yin. The majority of Mahayana Buddhist schools that view and practice Avalokitesvara, they do it to the Kwan Yin. Then we're going to be talking obviously about the Tibetan, and they see Avalokitesvara as a male, and he's called Chenrezig. So these are basically the 3 most common, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. In 7th century India, we've talked about the Theravada, and we've talked about the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, the Tantric. By the 7th century in India, basically the only thing that's being practiced is Vajrayana Buddhism. And the deity that everyone in India is practicing or, praying for and praying to is Avalokitesvara. He's looked about with just about the same type of reverence as the Buddha was in India. And there was some of the early writings of Chinese monks that went to India during this time were very surprised to see that, a deity, a tantric deity, would be revered as much as Avalokitesvara was. And this continued. The Buddha predicted that the 12th century is when Buddhism was going to end in India. And sure enough, by the time the 12th century rolled around, Buddhism was becoming extinct. A major factor in that was it was in the 12th century that Muslims began invading India, and one of the first things they were destroying were Buddhist temples. You know, in our last class, we did some talk. We were talking about emptiness, and we were discussing that there is ultimate truth, and there's relative truth. The relative truth is how we make sense of something, common sense, you know, a story, something that we can relate to. Ultimate truth is very different than relative truth. And in many ways, if you're not careful, your relative truth clouds your mind to what is ultimate truth. Now, when we talk about Chenrezig, you know, the ultimate truth is that Chenrezig, he's primordial. And when you talk about the term primordial, what it means is this is self-generating, self-emanating. This is a self-originating Buddha that was present before anything else existed. And see, that's the real way things are. But when we talk about, you know, the realm of desire where we are, you know, we need to have something that we can focus on, attach to, and what we tend to think of is that everything has to have a beginning and an end. In relative truth, that doesn't exist. And the Buddha talked a great deal about this, that one of the biggest forms of ignorance that we have is this delusion of beginning and end. You know, in the realm of desire that we are in, and there's 6 different realms in the realm of desire, this sense of beginning and end is prevalent. And it's one of the things, and it's very difficult. You know, if somebody said to me today, well, you know, today we're not going to have a beginning or an end of the day, I wouldn't know what's going to happen. But, you know, as you become more of an enlightened being, these things start to maybe take shape a little bit. It certainly hasn't for me yet. And in the Tibetan system, the Vajrayana Buddhism from the Tibetan, the name of Avalokitesvara is Chenrezig. And what that translates into is one who looks down upon all beings with the eyes of compassion. Very similar to what the Avalokitesvara definition itself is. And when we talk about the relative truth, the ultimate truth is Avalokitesvara is primordial. It was here before the beginning of time. But while we look at this in the Tibetan tradition, is that Amitabha, the Buddha of the Pure Land, we talked about him the session about Mahayana Buddhism. The Mahayana Pure Land of Amitabha is different than the Tibetan Tantric version of Amitabha in the Pure Land. In Tibet, the Pure Land is called Deshwan, and it's one of these realms of existence you can go to in an incarnation, and you still can do Bodhisattva work from the Pure Land. So it's a lot of the Tibetan tradition talks about, you know, going to the Pure Lands in the next, you know, life. But what Amitabha did is he conceived Chenrezig as a young man to help all sentient beings. And what he is an emanation of all the Buddha's activities, primarily compassion. You know, if you really want to see what the Avalokitesvara is it's just all of the compassion of the Buddhas, past, present, and future, that manifests in different forms. Now, when Avalokitesvara began to help people by being compassionate, and he saw that there were innumerable sentient beings that had these karmic veils. You know, he's supposed to help the people or the sentient beings, and he sees that they all have these karmic veils that are basically forms of the 3 poisons. You know, we can't really see reality. You know, we can't see ultimate truth. And he became very distraught. You know, this is what the legend and the teachings say. And while he was being distraught, a tear coming from his eye manifested into Tara, who pledged to help him. And then he also, Chenrezig also appeared with 2 additional arms. And next to Avalokitesvara Chenrezig, Tara is the most beloved deity in Tibet. The fascinating thing to me about this is when we talk about Kwan Yin, you're going to see that these 2 kind of have already melted. But Tara is the deity. The practice of Tara is when you're in times of trouble, fear, need help, need some, guidance and some mercy. Tara is the deity that, you go to with the mantra Tutera Turasava. But, Tara is very, very big deity in Tibetan Buddhism. White Tara has a lot to do with longevity, and there's 21 manifestations of Tara. But as the Tantric Buddhism, the Tibetan especially, what they look at is that Tara is a manifestation of Chenrezig. And the forearm Chenrezig, there's specific symbolism that you're going to see and I hope understand. When you see this picture like we have in here of Chenrezig, there's certain details, and these are pretty much reproductions of what certain tankas. Tankas are pictures. There's pictures that are painted, and then they're stitched into a brocade, and they are, what you use for deity practice, or they're meditational tools. And a lot of the pictures that we're showing today, they come from tankas. And the thing about this is that when the artist creates these wonderful images, they have to be somewhat uniform. You can't have Chenrezig, having different things in the hands. It's got to have, for this, the major forearm Chenrezig, certain things have to be in the picture, and they all have special meaning. Now, in this image, which is pretty much the standard image of forearm Chenrezig, he's white in color. And that's representing the four immeasurables of loving kindness, joy, equanimity, and compassion. And he has two hands that are folded in prayer while he's holding a brilliant lotus, or a brilliant wish-fulfilling jewel at his heart. You can't really see it too clearly in this, but right there he's holding this jewel. And what he is demonstrating this is that he's holding it close to his heart. That's demonstrating bodhicitta, or altruism, and true love for all sentient beings. In the first two hands, the upper hands, he's holding a set of crystal prayer beads, a mala, and his other hand he's holding a pristine lotus. And what this symbolizes is the promise to manifest continually in a multitude of ways to benefit us, like a steady momentum of counting prayer beads. And I think, it's interesting. The Buddha talked about 33 versions of Chenrezig, and the Tibetans believe that there are 108 main manifestations of Chenrezig, and that's the exact number of beads that are on a rosary or a mala. He has these 6 jewel ornaments, and you can see some of them are in the wrist, earrings, the crown, what have you. And what these are demonstrating is that the jewel ornaments he has to beautify himself come from he has perfected the inner 6 perfections, the paramitas of generosity, morality, patience, endeavor, and meditation. And what he's saying is that when you have those qualities within you, on the outer they manifest as preciousness, precious different types of ornaments and jewels. They come from the work that is done from within. The other thing is that he is wearing a deer skin that you can see right around here, and that's because he has perfected compassion and patience. There was a pledge, Chenrezig made a pledge in the story to Amitabha, and he pledged that as long as there was even one sentient being that's not attained enlightenment, he will strive for the benefit of all. And he said if he broke this promise, that his head and his body would break into 1,000 pieces. And after he said that, he sent a manifestation of himself to the 6 realms. We've talked about this in a few other classes. We live in the realm of desire, which has 6 distinct neighborhoods, so to speak. And he sent a manifestation of himself to each and every one of those because, he's not just helping, human sentient beings. He is there for all sentient beings, from the God realms to the hell realms. And if you look here, you can see this is a wrathful manifestation of Chenrezig in the hell realms. And there's one in the hungry ghost realms. Here's one in the animal realms. Here's one in the human realm. Here's one in the demigod realm. And here's one in the God realm. And, if you get past and you don't like, the story, but the main thing to remember here is that in this entire realm of desire, he's there for everybody. What the Buddha said is you call his name, call out to Chenrezig, Avalokitesvara, Kwan Yin, and, he's going to be there. You might not realize it because of the veils that we have, our karmic veils of ignorance, attachment, or aversion. They keep us from, seeing and feeling the deity right when it's around us. And obviously something happened here. You can tell by this new Avalokitesvara Chenrezig. What this story is that he worked for kalpas, and kalpas we've talked about. For those that are new, that's like 100,000 million year. They can be 100,000 year kalpas, million year kalpas. They are very, very long periods of time. I mean, and time is all relative. What's relative, how some people that can live for kalpas, that's their relativity, and it's like, we live for years. That's, they're both relevant to the form or the realm that you live in the 6 realms. But what happened was, Chenrezig he looked down after a few kalpas and he saw that he'd made, there was some progress. But there were still innumerable beings that were still lost. And he became very discouraged. And he finally, he decided that, he wasn't getting the job done. And he was going to just go to nirvana. As Bodhisattva of his level, all you got to do is put one foot in nirvana and that's it. You're in nirvana. But what happened was he contradicted the pledge he made to Amitabha. And as he was thinking about going into nirvana, he burst into 1,000 pieces. And Amitabha, through his grace, he reconstructed Chenrezig, and he made some changes to this new manifestation of Chenrezig. It's called the 1,000-armed, 11-head Chenrezig, and you can see that, these are the arms that you can make out as arms, but these back here are all arms too. And there's a great deal of symbolism with this. What he's standing on here, you can't really see down here is the sun, and this is the moon lotus. And what that represents is it's the method and the aspect. The sun equals wisdom or bodhicitta, and the moon is, wishing to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. He's white in color, which represents purity and lack of selfishness. The 1,000 arms are how compassion looks to all sentient beings that he reaches out to. I mean, what he's saying here is that you need a hand, I've got a hand for you. And in each one of these hands, if you look closely, these are eyes that are in each of the palms. And that represents method again, bodhicitta. And the eyes in this case, the arm is the bodhicitta, and the palm and hand with the eyes that represents wisdom. The 11 heads that he has are actually 10. And what that represents is the 10 perfections. And Abhidhamma is on this very top head, and he doesn't really count as one of the heads. This is a representation that Chenrezig is part of the Buddha Amitabha family. The jewel, he's got a jewel in his first 2 hands. This is a little bit more pronounced than the jewel in the 4th arm Chenrezig. And again, he is trying to manifest bodhicitta for the fulfillment of all other beings to be successful and happy. The lotus in his hand up here, it's just like in the other. It represents bodhicitta. The mala that this manifestation of Chenrezig, what this represents is tantric, and the tantric and the mantric aspect of the deity. Other traditions, except the Tantric Vajrayana, they don't use prayer beads or malas or rosaries. This is pretty much a Tantric Vajrayana tradition. The bow and arrow, that represents wisdom hitting the target of enlightenment. The wheel that he holds is dealing, with the Dharma, the continuous teachings. If you recall, when we were talking last session about the 7-branch prayer, there is, I think the 6th branch that talks about, please continue turning the Dharma wheel of enlightenment for the continuous teachings. By turning the wheel of Dharma, what you're doing is you're keeping the teachings alive. They keep moving. They keep moving. He's holding a vase, and that is the initiation of the tantric aspects. If you are a Vajrayana practitioner and you've taken any empowerments or initiations, the vase plays a very, very big part in each and every one of these. You start studying Tantric Buddhism, you will understand what that's really all about. His hands are in the mudra of supreme generosity. And what he's doing is he's bestowing the realization of his compassionate actions for everyone. And again, the deer skin for he's perfected compassion and patience. Now, a lot of people think that the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra came to Chenrezig when he was the forearm, because that's the mantra that we most, practice with forearm Chenrezig. The mantra that we understand was that mantra, and the symbol that you see when you're doing this forearm Chenrezig practice, it's Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the most common and popular mantra in the world. And the main aspect of this mantra that I think is really important to understand is demonstrating the awakened state of one's mind, that love and compassion, our love and compassion, is primordial. It's been present as long as we have. It came the way, we were manifested. It came with us. And it awakens this state in your mind. And the reason it does that is that it's important to really understand that, this compassion and love is not something we develop or generate, out of the air or just now. It's been like a seed planted in each and every one of us from all time and eternity to, technically the relative beginning. We'll talk about it there. And it's really important to understand you don't have to go out and get this compassion. What you have to do is just spend some time, meditating, doing certain practices, during, contemplation, and you begin to understand that this is within you. You don't have to go outside of, and what Om Mani Padme Hum does is it helps to trigger or let that seed start to grow inside of you, because Om Mani Padme Hum, the translation is jewel. The jewel in the lotus is basically what the mantra translates into, and Chenrezig is the jewel in the lotus. You look at, he is sitting in a lotus, and he's the jewel in it. And I think what's important to really get to with this, when you understand that this compassion, love and compassion that you have, it's there. You have to turn on the switch. You have to awaken it within you. And there was somebody that I studied with. I hadn't been practicing very long, and this person had a very big impact on me. And one of the things that he talked about that really resonated, and it was kind of like one of those moments where, you hit the light bulb above your head, is that what enlightenment actually is nothing but a state of compassion that is beyond our comprehension in this realm of desire. Enlightenment is nothing more than a level of compassion that we can't even quite dream of in the state that we are in. And the Chenrezig mantra, by repeating this mantra over and over and over again, it begins to purify the mind so that you can understand and begin to explore new levels of compassion. And that's the primary method of and why we chant the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. But what most people don't understand is this mantra, this is not just the only thing this mantra does. This mantra has several different significant and pertinent aspects that it does when you chant it. And it's just like if you chant this mantra, all of these different things we're going to cover in a second, they all are being practiced with the one chant. The first major significant thing that this mantra does is it closes the door to samsaric rebirth. We live in samsara. There's the 6 realms of existence. And when you chant Om, that closes the God realms, Ma, the demigods, Ni, human, Pad, animal, Mi, hungry ghost, Hung, hell. The more you chant that, the more those doors start to get thinner, thinner, thinner. The space between them gets thinner, thinner, and thinner, and eventually they close. Our wish is to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. That's if you're a Mahayana or Tantric practitioner. If you're a Theravada practitioner, it's you just want to become enlightened for yourself. But, we don't want to end up in these realms anymore. We want to end up as an enlightened being to help and benefit all other people and beings. The next benefit this mantra gives us is genuine purification. We talked about purifying our karma, purifying the veils of the 3 poisons, and this helps us. Om purifies the body. Our actions, our physical actions. Ma, the speech, things we say. Ni, the mind, what we think. Pad is conflicting emotions. A lot of times we become conflicted and we can't really see what the true emotion is really trying to tell us or what it's generating. Mi is past life conditions. Your past lives, that comes, back, good or bad. You will be dealing with those, but this helps, purify the past lives and conditions. It's very similar to the Vajrayana mantra we talked about, the 100-syllable mantra. You can purify yourself with the saying Om Mani Padme Hum, the Chenrezig mantra. And what we need to really know, that we talked about the ultimate truth, that we can't really, we rely on relative truth. We can't see the ultimate truth, true knowledge, and the Hum, the chanting with that part of the mantra, that helps, clean up what covers our ability to see and learn. The other aspect it does is it's a prayer to the Buddhists, the different aspects of the Buddha. Om addresses the body of the Buddha, Ma, the speech of the Buddha, Ni, the mind of the Buddhas, Pad, the quality of the Buddhas, Me, the activities of all the Buddhas, and Hung, the grace of all of the above. I really like this because, there's those 5, and then the 6 is kind of like it locks it in and, kind of puts it in like base 10 or base 6, whatever you want to, number you want to give it to it. The other thing it does is it helps us generate the 6 paramitas. Om is generosity, Ma is ethics, Ni is patience, Pad is diligence, Mi is concentration, and 6 is wisdom. By perfecting the 6 paramitas or becoming more diligent and being able to generate those are what are the key components to generate bodhicitta, which helps us understand compassion and love. And chanting this mantra, you get to sharpen up and polish the 6 paramitas for yourself. The other thing or prayer practice it does is to the 6 Buddha families. Om is Ratnasambhava, Ma is Omagasa-siddhi, Ni is Vajradhara, Pad is Vairochana, Mi is Antabhihaba, and Antahaba. Still having some dental problems here. I'm sorry about the lisp. Hung, Ashahobaya. So those are the 6 Buddha families, and by chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, we get to pay reverence to each one of those 6 Buddha families. The other thing that it helps understand the 6 wisdoms. There are 6 elements of wisdom. There's just not one wisdom, but these are the 6 major components of wisdom, is to learn the wisdom of equanimity, the wisdom of our activity, what we do, what is wise of what we do. We have a certain level of wisdom that's born of itself. You have, along with that seed of compassion, there's basically some seeds of wisdom and they come from in themselves. Pad is of Dharma Hatu. And what that means is real phenomenon, real truth, ultimate truth. Me is discriminating, and Hum is mirror-like. So those are the 6 wisdoms, and by chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, it helps to, lets us clarify and see these within ourselves, and thus we can generate and practice them. So that's what this mantra is capable of doing if you chant it. And, basically the most common practice, if Vajrayana practice here and in Tibet and anywhere else that it is to chant Om Mani Padme Hum. You will see people at each one of these. If you're in a Vajrayana Tibetan center here, people are going to be counting mantras and Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, and counting them on a mala. That's what people do in Tibet. Now, my teacher here, Guanyin Rinpoche, we talked about Nandro practice in the last session, and he said, if you really don't want to do that, you can just, you can perfect what that is supposed to do, the Nandro practice, if you say 100 million Om Mani Padme Hums, and, that's going to take some effort. I've done Nandro. I'm doing it again for this new sect that I've been exploring, and I'm doing that Nandro, but I'm also doing the 100 million Om Mani Padme Hums. I think with my karma, the more I can do with that, the better. And you can do. Right now I'm about on my 10th million, and a few of those I had done before this, but it's a major practice is just by chanting this mantra. There are several different schools. I mean, when we talked about the Nichiren school, their basic practice is just to chant, Namyo Renge Kyo. And that's their basic practice, the chanting the Lotus Sutra. There's more, obviously, to Tibetan practice, but, this mantra is very, very special and has a great history in Tibet and in every other place that Tibetan Buddhism is practiced to this day. And I mentioned my wonderful teacher here, Guanyin Rinpoche, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but the 1,000-armed Chenrezig has his own mantra, and it's very long. It's Namo Ratana Trayaya, Namo Argaya Gyana Sargayar, Bodhisattva Buddhaye Radzotatya Arahat Samaksam Buddhaye, Namo Sara Tathagatabaye, Arhat Baye, Mahasoteya, Mahakarunikaya, Tadyatha Om, Dari Dari, Diri Diri, Duri Duri, Iti Viti, Tasli Tasli, Tresle Place, Kusume Kusuma, Ver Ilimili, Titsa Dosala, Opanya Soha. And the reason I mention this, and I've got this cover of my dear teacher's book here, is that one of the main, there is a 4-arm Chenrezig practice, a 1,000-arm Chenrezig general practice, but one of the most significant practices of Chenrezig and the 100-arm mantra is what is called Nyen practice. And here in Los Angeles, we are really blessed to have Rinpoche here, because he's one of the most learned and knows more about this practice than about anybody else in the world. He's perfected this practice. He's not the only one by any means doing it, but so the Dalai Lama wrote the foreword to this book, and this book demonstrates and gives direction on how to do the Nyen practice. But Rinpoche does this right here in Los Angeles. He does it monthly, and then they just finished doing 25 sessions. A session of Nyen, it's 2 days. You go and you spend the night Friday, you practice all day Saturday, you practice all day Sunday. I'm not going to get into a lot of what the practice is. It's, though, to me, incredibly moving, and you do Nyen practice and you're going to feel very different. It helps to, it's like a major detox purification. And when it's done here in Los Angeles, it helps, it's like one of those situations that benefits the whole population of Los Angeles. And Rinpoche is doing this practice, but he's teaching, but he does Nyen practice all the time. And it really is. I just mention this because some people have asked me about retreat, And, going into a silent retreat, that on paper might look good. But trust me, when you go into retreat after a week, it's stir crazy. I can honestly tell you from when I've done Nyen practice, a Nyen practice, I feel I get the same benefit from that as if I have done a month-long retreat. It's very, very, very cleansing and very powerful. I've seen some people that had some medical problems that they did Nyen practice and they disappeared. And I'm not trying to say that in some metaphysical, airy-fairy, type of mysticism. But there's something. If you, outside of even here, if you look online, there's many accounts of Nyen practice having incredible benefit. And the main, what you're doing in Nyen practice, it's the thousand-armed. It's the practice of purification, and the deity is the thousand-armed Chenrezig. Now, we talk about manifestations, and the Buddha, the Tibetans, everybody said, sutras, this deity Chenrezig, was going to come in many, many different ways, and all peaceful deities have some wrathful aspects or a few like twin aspects of them, so to say. But Chenrezig has got quite a pedigree. I don't like, he's involved or manifests as many different deities that are extremely helpful. And one of the deities, and there's many, many, they're called the Zambahala, the wealth deities. And he manifests many of these. I've put up 3 of the main wealth deities, and there's several others. And when you mention wealth deities, and a lot of people in the West go, well, I don't understand this. You talk about greed, attachment to money, and, what are you doing trying to manifest money? You have to, forget all about what you think wealth is all about before you even begin to, comprehend what the Zambahala wealth practices and deities do. Yes, they do, help you in times of financial need. And it's important to remember what the Buddha said. The Buddha talked about all of the attachments and what greed, but he also was very specific that you needed to have your needs met. If you're going to be a serious practitioner, you've got to make sure that you can stay alive to practice. You need, shelter, you need food, you need clothes, and, pay all of your bills, what have you. And that's the thing that, the Zambahalas help those that have financial issues with. The other thing, though, that is let's, forget just about the money aspects. What the Zambahalas also help generate is a wealth of everything. A wealth of insight, a wealth of wisdom. It's specific to help, wealth is not just money. And these deities are very, much sought after, especially in the Tibetan tradition, to help, not just for money, but with other things that we want to be, have a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of whatever, suits you or what you're trying to gain. These are pretty much the 3 primary aspects of Chenrezig manifesting into the Zambahalas. And this is white Zambahala, this is yellow Zambahala, and this is the wrathful aspect of Zambahala, white Mahakala. There's a couple of stories, or legends where the Tibetan tradition talk about. And one of the most popular is, we touched a little bit about Atisha, Lama Atisha, who is a major factor in the Gulag tradition. And he came across a starving man in Bodh Gaya, and Lama Atisha was going to cut some of his flesh to help save the starving man. And the old man said, "How can I eat a monk's flesh?" And the Lama Atisha felt helpless. And in the face of all this suffering, he didn't know what to do, and Chenrezig appeared to him. And he said, I will manifest this as Zambahala, as the Buddha of wealth, to help suffering beings. I shall alleviate their poverty so they will not be distracted practicing the good heart. Now there is pretty much saying what, going over what the Buddha said, you need to be out of poverty so you can practice. You're not worried about, and if you are practicing with a good heart, that means that you're not having to think about the distractions or things that you might do that aren't the swiftest in the world to make money. The other thing that's important that what this says is poverty. Now, and we might do an evening class. We're going to start doing some interesting evening classes. And one is probably going to be on the Zambahala, the wealth practices. And when you do a tantric or a Tibetan Vajrayana practice, you know, if you are initiated into these, you become the deity in the practice. It doesn't mean, you know, you leave the practice, you start saying, you know, my name's Chenrezig or anything like that. But when these practices, you're doing them, you know, you're not saying, I'm doing this for me. It's for the benefit of all sentient beings, and for you're generating that the benefit will help you become enlightened to help other sentient beings. It's important to understand that you're doing the practice for all sentient beings, which includes you, but it helps us separate the, you know, self, the sense of self, the I. Those practices start to, you know, erase a little bit of the I every time you do them. And in this, the wealth practices of the Zambahalas, you know, you're trying to generate, you know, wealth to help the poorest of the poor. And, you know, we're seeing poverty in this country. I don't think we've seen poverty in this country since the Depression. And, you know, it's good to do these types of practices for the benefit of all beings. So a little bit about the wealth practices. The other version about this, you know, story, there's two primary stories about Zambahala. There's the one I just told you about at Lama Atisha. The other was, you know, as the protector of the Buddhists, and this was Yellow Zambahala. You know, there were several people that tried to assassinate the Buddha. And, you know, if you want to find something that, you know, you're never going to be able to do to be the most frustrated thing you could possibly, you know, and try as an endeavor, would be to assassinate or kill a Buddha. It's just not going to happen unless there's some sort of karmic situation with you and some Buddha. But the story is that there were some people that were going to stone the Buddha. And as they were throwing the stones, Chenrezig in the form of the yellow Zambahala, you know, came as like a veil or a protector, and the stones hit him and not the Buddha. And what he was doing in that is he was purifying, you know, their wealth of their ignorance. And then they became, you know, better. They became practitioners of Dharma instead of trying to kill the Buddha. Now, we talked a little bit about wrathful deities in the last class, of the Tantric class. So we've said that these are aspects or manifestations of, you know, peaceful deities. And Mahakala is probably the most well-known protector of the wrathful deities, the protector of Tibetan Buddhism. He protects all the monasteries, all of the Tibetan Dharma. He's charged for helping practitioners. If you practice Mahakala, it pacifies your hindrances, it enriches your life, it has virtue and wisdom, and it destroys the confusion and ignorance in some ways that are wrathful. You know, some of us, that is, you know, a wrathful deity is going to be beneficial. Sometimes the peaceful deity is not necessarily what the recipe calls for. You know, wrathful practices are advanced practices. You definitely have to have empowerments to practice the wrathful aspects. It's not something that you're going to do, you know, right away if you become a tantric Tibetan practitioner. But Mahakala is definitely, I think all four schools, Mahakala plays a major role in the, as the protector. Definitely with the Kagu sect, Mahakala is the primary protector. And, you know, like the Gulab sect, they have a Mahakala practice, but their primary protector is still Yamantaka. But Mahakala is known by each and every school of Tibetan Buddhism. And Mahakala, this is the six-arm Mahakala that the Shangpa tradition that I belong to, the Rimei Shangpa, this is the protector of that tradition. And Mahakala manifests in 2-arm, 4-arm, 6-arm. He can have several heads. He can have, different colors. It's like when we talk about any of these deities, it's not just Chenrezig, but deities come to you in ways that you can relate to, and when you have all these different types of wrathful manifestations of some, certain ones are a little bit more inclined to do certain things. There's the overall Mahakala, but the different colors represent that it will work in a little bit of a nuance on something else. But major deity. Most all Mahakala manifestations are of Chenrezig. He's the wrathful manifestation. There's a few that are not. I'm not off the top of my head really sure which deity they are the manifestation of. There's some, not going on a tangent here about wrathful deities, but some aren't emanations or embodiments or anything else of any other deity. They're primordial too. The other wrathful deity that Chenrezig manifests of is Hayagriva, and this is a wrathful. This is a more specific wrathful deity. Definitely protects against the standard things that wrathful we talked about above, that pacifies the hindrances of reaching life. But this has a little bit of, there's specific things that this deity is most known for, and that's one is curing disease, particularly the skin. And I didn't understand this at first. It's like, why was there a deity for skin disease, until I did a little bit of research, and there was a tremendous amount of beings suffering from leprosy in Tibet from generations, and they would call upon Hayagriva to help them cure the skin disease. The other thing that's interesting about this deity is that if you look at his head, he's got horses, and he's like the horse protector too, and it frightens demons when he neighs like a horse. When we talk about demons, we're not talking about the literal demon per se, but it frightens the demons that we have within us, kind of gets their attention. And we can't talk about Chenrezig. This is a little bit heavy on the tantric side so far, the Tibetan side, and this is a good reason why. There are, Padmasambhava. We talked about Padmasambhava in the class about his prophecy, and he said that when the iron bird flies and horses run on wheels, the people of Tibet will be scattered like ants in the wind, and the Dharma will flourish in the land of the red-faced people. Padmasambhava, another prediction that he gave that came true, is he said that there would be 2 major teachers in Tibet that would be manifestations of Chenrezig. And the most well-known is the Dalai Lamas. This came about in 1578. Sonam Gyatso, he was the 3rd incarnation of a very, very scholared and respected and well-known, well-liked monk. And he went to Mongolia to give a teaching to Altan Khan. There is a lot of history between the Tibetans and Mongolians, and actually today I think that probably the purest form of Tibetan Buddhism that is practiced is probably in Mongolia today. And there's a rich history between Dalai Lamas and the Khans. I think it's the 4th Dalai Lama was the grandson of one of the Khans. But anyway, in 1578, Sonam Gyatso came to teach Altan Khan, and he had a profound effect on Altan Khan. That's just the start of when the Khans gave up their barbaric and violent ways and embraced Dharma. And there's been a lot of people, they know this part of the story, and then they start doing the translation of Dalai Lama, and they come up with Ocean of Wisdom. And that's not the title of what Dalai Lama means. In Mongolian, what the title means is the wonderful Vajrayana, good, splendid, meritorious ocean. And that's quite a bit different than just Ocean of Wisdom. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a little bit humble, and he says, well, he was just trying to talk about Ocean of Merit, and it's not quite like that. Sonis the Dalai Lama is a very, very humble person. If you ask him, are you an enlightened being? He, no, I don't know that much of anything. Tibetan Buddhists, we believe that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a completely enlightened being. And somebody said, well, how can you tell if somebody's is a fully enlightened being? And I've always said, because they'll deny it. They'll deny it emphatically, and they'll laugh. If you're a totally enlightened being, you have no need to tell anybody else. You just are. And so son of Gyatso becomes Dalai Lama. And they decided that his first and second, they knew of two incarnations prior where he was a dear and devoted teacher. And what they did is they declared, his first and second incarnation as Dalai Lamas. Now, Tenzin Gyatso, our present Dalai Lama, is the 14th incarnation. There have been what are called great Dalai Lamas. The first was the third. He started the institution of Dalai Lama. The second was the great fifth. And it's important to know about the fifth Dalai Lama. It was this Dalai Lama that became not just the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, but he became the temporal leader, like the president of the country. And there was a lot of nastiness and some bloodshed. That this is not the on the highlight reel of Tibetan Buddhism. There were a lot of warlords, and there were a lot of different sects and traditions that were controlling different parts of Tibet. Kaguz had quite a bit of influence, and what Dalai Lama and the Gelupas decided is we need to unify all of this, and Dalai Lama is going to become the spiritual leader of all Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, but he will also be the temporal leader, the president, the king. So that's the Dalai Lama became, basically the uniter of Tibet, not always in the nicest way, but that's what happened. And he was very effective. The other Dalai Lama that is considered great is the 13th Dalai Lama, the prior incarnation before our beloved Dalai Lama now. And he was very, very remarkable man. He understood Padmasambhava's bit is saying about the iron bird and the horses on wheels. He knew that there was real trouble brewing, and he knew it was going to be the Chinese. The Chinese and the Tibetans always had a agreement to disagree. But 13th Dalai Lama became he was very clairvoyant, and he could see what was going to happen. And he went to the Tibetan, but their Congress or their Senate is called this, the Gashong. And 13th Dalai Lama went to the Gashong, and he said, we need to. He heard about this League of Nations, and he understood that if we Tibet could become part of the League of Nations, that would thwart or seriously impede the Chinese coming into Tibet. And the Gashong, they didn't get it. The Gashong was still a great. They were trying to keep Tibet somewhat. In the darker ages. 13th Dalai Lama was the one that really started to put Tibet into the 20th, 21st century. Electricity, he was now in Tibet. He started banking. He started like a postal system. He was really doing a lot to try to, get the Tibetans more, in tune with what the rest of the world was doing. If you were around until before 13th Dalai Lama and you wanted to go to Tibet, you had to sneak in, and you had to stay pretty much hidden because they did not let outsiders come into Tibet. That's one reason that Tibetan Buddhism is as pure as it is. Nobody was in there to tinker with it. And the 13th Dalai Lama, the Gashong was somewhat ignorant. They didn't really understand, League of Nations, and he, though, understood that as old as he was, he needed to have his next incarnation here as younger being to handle or try to thwart what was going to be happening. And he started to wind down his life then, and then the 14th Dalai Lama was found. Now, with these teachers we're going to be talking about, Dalai Lama and Karmapa, they both are, the 14th Dalai Lama, there's 14 incarnations. And the way that after the third Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama is picked is that the candidate that the monks or the regent or, the oracles find, they are given, I think it's 6 or 8, 6 I think is the right amount. They're giving 6 sets of things that belong to the last incarnation, and then there's 2 ringers next to it, or, so you see 3 objects, like with the last Dalai Lama, I remember, it was 3 pair of glasses. And this little 3-year-old boy, Lamo Thundup, he picked each and every one that was his in the past life, and that's how Lamo Thundup became Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama. And by the way, we talked about 13th Dalai Lama becoming Great Dalai Lama. 14th Dalai Lama is going to definitely be considered Great Dalai Lama. He's the most well-known Buddhist in the world. He's won a Nobel Peace Prize. He does a tremendous amount of public talks that are not just for people, interested in Buddhism. Dalai Lama loves humanity, and it's very clear that he does as many public talks as he does, and he's as well received as he is. Now, while we know a great deal about Dalai Lamas as incarnations of Chenrezig, there was a very wonderful institution before Dalai Lama that recognized their leader, spiritual leader, as an embodiment of Chenrezig too, and that was the Karmapa. The Karmapas, this is the 17th Karmapa we have now. And the first Karmapa was Dusam Khyempa. And he was a disciple. This is really interesting. He was one of the disciples of the Tibetan master Gampopa. This master Gampopa was, directly responsible for the Kagu school and sect to manifest and be what it is today. This Karmapa was a very talented child, the first one. And he started studying Dharma as a child. He had this tremendous interest in learning about Dharma, even as a little boy. And his father recognized this. He recognized that his son was something special. And his father was teaching him originally, but then he sought out teachers from an early age. And, when he was in his 20s and 30s, he was taking seriously advanced teachings, and he was understanding them. He was getting them immediately. And it said that he attained enlightenment at the age of 50 while practicing dream yoga. Dream yoga is a practice that, it's an advanced practice where you are able to basically control your dreams and do practices while you dream at night. And so then he was regarded as Karmapa, the manifestation of Chenrezig. By the way, that was predicted in the Samudahara Sutra and the Lakavartra Sutra, that there would be being great Karmapa. The last Karmapa was a very, very wonderful teacher, and we owe Buddhism a great deal. The Western practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism, Karmapa was sending teachers to America. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was, he was definitely a Kagu. And, Kalu Rinpoche. Kalu Rinpoche doesn't get the credit I think he deserves. He was coming over here even before Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, setting up Dharma centers, and he was the first one that really put American students into 3-year retreats to become lamas, something he really believed in. The 16th Karmapa, he was in the United States. He loved to come over here, and he had cancer, but he wanted to come, and he ended up coming to America very sick, and eventually he had to be hospitalized when he was in Chicago, and he was dying. And if you want to watch a wonderful documentary, it's called Roar of the Lion, that talks about 16th Karmapa being sick. And part of the end of it is sickness and death that happened in Chicago. And you had there interviewed doctors and nurses that talked about, he should have been racked in pain and miserable. But Karmapa was sitting, he was still very sick, but he was sitting up in bed, and he was very kind and very loving and pleasant. And, the nurses and the doctors, they loved Karmapa. He was that type of, wonderful individual that just radiated love and compassion. He's a manifestation of Chenrezig. Of course, he, radiates compassion. This young guy next to him, this is the present incarnation of Karmapa. His name is Ogyen Trinley Dorje. There was a little confusion at one point in time, and there's somebody else that a few Europeans have decided, through a teacher in India, one of the Karmapa, they decided that another one is the Karmapa, but no. This is the Karmapa. This is the one all the leaders of the four schools, sects, the other Kagu sects, they understand this is Karmapa. And he's going to be an amazing, amazing teacher. He really is reaching out to younger people interested in Buddhism. And I've always said, and I've talked with many of you about this, a lot of us that are practitioners now, you see most really devout Dharma practitioners are, 40s and 50s. I think it takes that long for you to realize you've been chasing your tail all your life and that, let's get down to business here. But Karmapa has done a lot to reach out to, a younger audience. I went to a lecture at Redlands University where students there went and spent some time with Karmapa. They had this wonderful experience where they, were with Karmapa every day for a little bit. And Karmapa was doing teachings with them, but not, talking specifically in dharmic terms. He was talking to them in a way that they could relate. And we're going to talk a little bit in the next slide about the relationship with him and Dalai Lama. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is in his 70s, and I think he's going to be teaching well into his 80s, possibly 90s. But eventually, you're going to see this Karmapa, pick up some of the slack. And he's already starting to do some wonderful teachings in India. And I think you're going to see him flourish in this country, too. I have an interesting experience with Karmapa. When I went to Kalachakra a couple of years ago, every day I went to the same place during break. Kalachakra is, this is a week, 10-day long affair, an ordeal. It's not really an ordeal, but it's intense. And I always went to this one place and had lunch. And then when I came back, I went into this one door that Karmapa was always going into. He has his Secret Service detail, just like Dalai Lama, and they would come into this door, and I would, sit back, move back quickly, let Karmapa go. And after about the third day, he realized he was seeing me every day, and he just smiled at me, and I mean, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. You just could feel this intense sense of love and compassion. Holiness Dalai Lama is one of my root teachers, and I can swear that he's the real deal, and there's no doubt that Karmapa is the real deal, too. We're really living in a wonderful time that we can have some of these amazing teachers, and not just the Tibetan tradition. Thich Nhat Hanh is, I believe he's an amalgamation of Chenrezig. You don't have just not Tibetans. There's other people that believe, they might consider it Kwan Yin, what have you, but definitely this is not just a Tibetan situation. And why I mention this, this is very emotional for me because I've got one teacher that is Kagu, and one teacher that is Gelu, Dalai Lama, and one Rinpoche. And, I'd mentioned that there had been some real issues between the Kagus and the Galupas, and that would kind of pitted Dalai Lamas against Karmapas. And what's happened now is there's an incredible, wonderful, warm relationship between Karmapa and Dalai Lama. I think if you've seen Kunda in the movie, or rudimentary information about Dalai Lama, is that he escaped from Tibet to go to India with the Chinese invasion. The Chinese were getting ready to try to assassinate and kill Dalai Lama, and he fled to India. And Karmapa, this incarnation of Karmapa, he was born in Tibet, and he was teaching in Tibet. He had a very, a pretty good relationship with the Chinese. They respected Karmapa because he was there already, and he had this devout following, and he was not too political. But he became, very concerned because all of these great teachers, it's not like they just, are reincarnated and presto, they remember everything. They have to take these teachings again and again. And Karmapa was at the point that he really needed certain teachings to, continue his evolution. And the Chinese, they promised they would let him go to India to see some teachers. They never let that happen. And then they gave him the false hope that they would let these teachers come in and teach him, and that never happened. And it ended up that the Karmapa made a very daring escape out of Tibet and ended up in India too. And the first person that was out there to greet him, and it was very emotional, was Dalai Lama. It's emotional for all of us that are Tibetan practitioners, because you see these two amazing manifestations of Chenrezig. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been in the Karmapa's corner, and it's really clear the affection they have for one another. So a lot of times there's certain teachers that still want to try to, they have certain really different opinions of these two, but there definitely is a very warm, wonderful relationship. And during Kalachakra, Karmapa was always introduced, and he had his own special seat in the front of the throne of Dalai Lama. The last Kalachakra master was Kala Rinpoche for the Kaigus. And seeing Karmapa attending as many Kalachakra initiations, I wouldn't be surprised to eventually see Karmapa give the Kalachakra initiation. This might be a little bit more for the Tibetan audience. I'm not trying to let that eat up all of our time, but when you're talking about Chenrezig, you have to talk about the manifestations that are here for us right now. Now, we talked about that some of the Mahayana traditions, they have a relationship with Kwan Yin. That's who the Chenrezig deity manifests in that way for the majority of them. However, there are two other Mahayana schools, and they believe that Avalokitesvara is manifested in male form. And the Zen practitioners, they believe that Bodhidharma, guy here that every picture drawing you see this guy, it looks like he's angry. He was a remarkable and loving being, though. But he's the father of Zen, and Bodhidharma, predominantly most of the Mahayana practitioners see him as emanation of Chenrezig. And interesting to me, Bodhidharma, you've heard of the Shaolin monks that do these amazing kung fu and mind over matter things. People don't really realize the Shaolins are Buddhists. It's a Buddhist sect. It's a Buddhist tradition, and it was created by Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma is the father of all martial arts. Kung fu and Tai Chi started as moving meditations. Bodhidharma saw that he had all of these monks, doing these Shaolin monks that were devoted to their meditation, and if you just sit and meditate all day and eat, eventually your body's going to start to suffer. And what Bodhidharma did is he created these were moving meditations for the Shaolin monks to do, and they kept perfecting it. But the Shaolin monks don't see Bodhidharma as a manifestation of Avalokitesvara. Yeah, they see in an Dharmakaya form, they see Avalokitesvara as Vajrapani. Now, if you look at this, it's very difficult to tell the difference between Vajrapani and Mahakala, but there is a difference, and that's what the Shaolin monks, that's their manifestation of Avalokitesvara. And we talk a lot about the Tibetan tradition being, it is the primary tantric Buddhist tradition in the world, but there are still Chinese and Japanese sects that are, they're very serious tantric Vajrayana practitioners. They don't, the deities that they practice are, and the Tibetans, they're very, very different. We talked about in the last class some of the, different types of gods or different types of Buddhas that other tantric practitioners, that's their principal and primary deities. However, they do have, the Chinese and Japanese both have a version of Avalokitesvara, and it's female, and it's called Kundi. It's probably the most revered in the Chinese and Japanese Buddhist esoteric sects. In China, she's known as Yutapushi, and that translated as Kundi Bodhisattva, or she's called Junte Forma, which is Kundi Buddha. Excuse me, Kundi Buddha Mother. In Japan, she's known as Gyunte Kyanon, which translates to Kundi Avalokitesvara. You see some of the same symbols. All these symbols have pretty much the same meaning of, different symbols in Kundi's arm, hands. And one of the most, prominent to me is the flaming sword, which, in our centric Tibetan tradition, the flaming sword is Manjushri. That's what, he's cutting through ignorance with. But this is a primary deity, and it's not 1,000 arms. It's 16 arms, 8 on each side. That's, there's still the connection with Amitabha, which you see above Avalokitesvara Kundi. So now let's talk about Avalokitesvara Kwan Yin. Every Asian country that practices, or is Mahayana tradition that recognizes Kwan Yin, they have a little bit different saying and spelling. In some Asian countries it's called Kwan Yin, Japan and other it's called Guanyin, and in some it's Guanyin, but it's all the same deity. This is the female manifestation of Avalokitesvara, and there's a couple of interesting things that are, most people, if they start looking at images of Kwan Yin, they always see that she's in the ocean. When we talked about Chenrezig and Terra, he manifested Terra, what I noticed with Kwan Yin is it's like she is a combination of Terra and Kwan Yin. It's not just the love and compassion, but there's a great emphasis on mercy, protection, and calling her out in times of trouble and strife. And it's very similar to what you do with Terra. And I mentioned this about the water because Kwan Yin is also seen as the protector of all at sea, sailors, longshoremen, anybody that's in the sea. If they're in need, the teaching is to call out to Kwan Yin, and she will come. She's like the patron saint of the sea. And the other thing that is, when you talk about the Terra connection, so to speak, she's, like I said, the goddess of mercy, and she's seen as a savior, which is a little different, from the traditional Mahayana, Vajrayana ideal. She's seen as a savior both physically and spiritually. When you say savior in this, it's not like saying that she's Jesus. It's not that common of a term, but I think the best way of looking at it is she helps you save yourself, both physically and spiritually. It's not like Jesus. She helps you save yourself. And just exactly like Chenrezig, Kwan Yin comes in two. These are the three most well-known Kwan Yins. There's the two-arm Kwan Yin, the four-arm Kwan Yin, and the thousand-arm manifestation. And when you read the story, it's the exact same thing as with Chenrezig. They don't have the Terra part of the story. They kind of omit that, or it didn't happen with their tradition. And, then the forearms, she made the promise, broke into 1,000 pieces, and Amitabha put her back together. Amitabha is still a major part in the Kwan Yin story. And, there's one of the things where, it's tough with some of these to see the thousand arm. They both look very similar, the Chenrezig and the Kwan Yin. The Kwan Yin thousand armed is almost always seated, which is not the case with Chenrezig. Same 11 heads, same 1,000 arms, same symbols, just one is female and one is male. They're not really female or male, but that's the manifestation that they have given that people's disposition is going to be, the most likely to accept. And like Avalokitesvara Chenrezig, Kwan Yin has a mantra too. And when you talk about how, a Tibetan Vajrayana practice is you sit and either watch, observe, the deity, and then, so if you're empowered, you become the deity, and But how you practice these you say the mantra too, so I wanted to make sure you understood that there's always the mantra in the Vajrayana practice. In the Mahayana practices are generally, you read a prayer and you recite the mantra. And there's a little difference. This mantra, Namo Mo Kwan Yin Pusa, it's a little bit different than it doesn't have anything really to do so much with Om Mani Padme Hum. The spiritual practice of this is to cultivate the virtues of mercy, forbearance, and nurturing. And if you are, if you're different sects spell the Kwan Yin different, but it's always the same meaning, and the mantra translates. We'll talk a little bit about that. The name Kwan Yin is Kumarajiva's direct translation of Avalokitesavara. Kumarajiva was the primary translator from China that the Pali and Sanskrit sutras he translated into Chinese. He was a very brilliant monk, and was the master of translation. And he did. It's difficult for some of you have these different Asian dialects, and then they're having to translate things from Pali, Sanskrit into their native language, and the Chinese and Kumarajiva had a great deal to do with some spot-on translations. The mantra meaning, Namo translates of Nama meaning hail. It's come to connotate in this mantra reverence, devotion, or taking refuge, as well as invoking a spiritual presence. We've talked from the very first class about taking refuge. All different sects and traditions take refuge. And when you're doing this, it's the Namo, you're taking refuge in regards to invoking this spiritual presence. Kwan is observe, see, regard, pay heed. Shia, the world, sound, voices, cry. So if you look at Kwan Yin, the name of the deity, it's the same thing, observes the world's cries. The difference a lot of times, we mentioned before, I should have mentioned this, when you talk about Chenrezig, you're talking about seeing. The Buddha said the Avalokitesvara hears. Chenrezig is that you see. The Chenrezig, means gazing down at the world. When you're talking about Kwan Yin, it has very little to do with the visual. It has a lot to do with the audio. So what you hear is that the one that hears the cries of the world, observes the cries of the world. And Pusa is the translation of Bodhisattva, so it would be the Bodhisattva who observes the cries of the world. And then when you translate the whole thing, it becomes hail regard to the world's cries, Bodhisattva. When you are chanting this mantra, the direction, the instruction is that, it's that of a loving mother calling her lost child. And, they're not doing this to ask for blessings of themselves. They want to chant this to cultivate the same compassion embodied by Kwan Yin for all sentient beings. That's the thing. Even though that a Mahayana practice might not do, a deity-type yoga, all practices by Mahayana and Vajrayana practitioners are geared for the benefit of all sentient beings and not yourself. Yourself is part of sentient beings, so you get it. What you do in each one of these different Mahayana and Tantric practices is you're doing it for you to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's not, I want to be, I don't want to be enlightened just for myself. I got to do this for one and all. This was something I just discovered recently, and I thought it was worthy of mentioning. Well, I think all of us have probably been into a Thai, Japanese, Chinese, what have you, Eastern Asian country or restaurant, and you usually will see in a box someplace or someplace, some sort of Buddhist little shrine. Some of them are very elaborate, some of them are very small. The one I see all the time when I, get some Chinese food, they've got it's a little red box. They also got a cat there waving. But what I didn't know is that if you go into a Chinese restaurant or an Asian, Thai, whatever, and you see one of these little shrines, if you look at who the deity is, you're going to find out what the restaurant's all about. And when you see Kwan Yin, that's the main deity in one of these shrines. That's giving you a clue that almost all, if not every part of the menu is vegetarian. And there's certain, for certain, if it's like more of a seafood Oriental restaurant, oh, don't use that Oriental word, that's terrible, Asian restaurant, whatever their specialty is, you're going to see a deity that is the representation of that deity. So it's kind of a little bit of a, quirky thing, but I found it very fascinating. Now, interestingly enough, there's some of the deities of Vajrayana Buddhism that have some, root in Hindu. But this is the only deity that I'm aware of, a Buddhist deity, that is also revered by Taoists. They definitely have a Kwan Yin deity too. And the legend of the Taoist Kwan Yin, the story of Kwan Yin, the Taoist version, it's kind of dark. The story starts with the legend of there was a very, very cruel king that had a daughter, and he was demanding he was demanding that she marry a real, basically a carbon copy of him, a very uncaring and cruel man, and she refused. She said, I will marry him if you can help in the three sufferings. And what she called the three sufferings was age, illness, and death. That's exactly what, sparked the Buddha to become concerned. He couldn't understand why people aged, got sick, and died. Why would you keep coming back to do this? And, this Kwan Yin said, I will do this if you will help, in the suffering of age, falling ill, or death. And I don't think it was so much that she expected her father to, miraculously cure these things, but that he would take pity and have compassion for the elderly, the ill, and those dying. And, she said, if you're not going to do that, I'm going to become a nun to try to do it. And that really upset her father. And he had her immediately imprisoned, and she suffered greatly. I mean, some of the stories talk about, torture and beatings, and others, it was a miserable existence. And her father kept her there until she would agree to marry this guy, and she refused. And finally he ordered her, he had enough, and he was cruel enough, he just said, kill her. Let's execute her. Execute my daughter. And she was executed, but just as she was dying, a supernatural tiger took her to one of the hell-like realms. They've got hell realms in Taoism too. And he took her to one of the hell realms, but instead of being punished like the other spirits, she immediately began to play music. And while she was in hell, the flowers blossomed around her. And this completely surprised and scared the hell guardians. The story goes on to say that, Kuan Yin, by merely being in hell, this hell realm, turned it into a paradise. And then she was said to return to earth. She stayed a few years practicing on Mount Pyoto, and she practiced meditation, and she too continues to be a patron saint for all those at sea too. And I mentioned earlier on in the presentation that the Theravada tradition, there's a few of the sect schools that they, acknowledge Avalokitesvara. I've said that all the Mahayana, the Tantric, Vajrayana, and the Theravada, they agree to disagree on some doctrine. They don't ever say the other is crazy or wrong. Theravada comes very close. They don't believe in any of this deity stuff, especially the deity practices that the Tibetan Vajrayana practitioners do. But there's a respect to that. When you go see Dalai Lama, you will always see a contingent of Theravada monks there, listening to the teachings, what have you. But, I think a lot of it goes back to, the 7th century in India, that Avalokitesvara had just such an amazing level of respect and worship. And there are, 3 of the major Theravada traditions that they, they have a Avalokitesvara that they pray and do some sort of practice to. In Sri Lanka, which is very, very, major Theravada tradition that's there, they have a version of Avalokitesvara called Vithaya Deva. And a lot of times people didn't understand this at first because I don't think we've talked about the Buddha of the future, Maitreya, yet, but this one looks a lot like Maitreya, and for a long time, that was mistaken. People thought when they saw this image it was Maitreya. In Burma, it's a female deity, and she's always looking up. She's not looking down. For some reason, this Avalokitesvara is looking up. I don't know that much about this, the way they, revere and practice this deity, but she is called Lokanath, and that's the Burma version of Avalokitesvara. And in Thailand, very, very special deity, and she's called Lokitesavara. And I didn't put a slide up, but I doing a little bit of research for this, I was kind of curious if there were any other religions when I saw that Taoism had, Kwan Yin, Avalokitesvara, that they, represented some things in their religion. But I was looking to see if there was anything else, and I was fascinated to find it's not that they necessarily worship Kwan Yin, but in certain countries where Christians were heavily persecuted, Asian countries, they had to kind of go into hiding. But what a lot of them did, the ones that, prayed to the Virgin Mary, what they did is they took Kwan Yin statues and they put, a heart and a crucifix somewhere inconspicuous on the statue. So what they were basically doing is worshiping and praying to the Virgin Mary, but, was looking like Kwan Yin. I found that, somewhat interesting and fascinating. That's the end of this presentation. I want to talk a little bit. We're going to do one or two other classes with this series, and then some parts of it will repeat. We have special evenings set up. We're going to have an addiction evening. I'm hoping to have an evening with a Theravada, Mahayana, and Tibetan. Some monastic from each one of those traditions. We can sit down and have a roundtable type discussion. And then we've had enough interest that this class is going to repeat, and it's not going to be the same. It will always be different and unique because all of us are different and unique. And, we're excited. The other thing I want to make sure is if any of you have questions, you can go, I'm showing this one page, you can go to NalandaLGBT.org, and there's, ways to get a hold of me. You can get a hold of us on Facebook. But, if there's something that you want to know more about or you have questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. That's what we're here for. When we do a lot of these classes, and the majority of it is online, we don't have necessarily participation. But we want to know what you want to know about. Another thing that we've heard a lot of people have been asking about, and we're looking at scheduling too, is evening with a Tibetan doctor. Tibetan medicine is fascinating. It's basically the medicine that the Buddha had prescribed. And this is our moment to talk to you about donations. I really, really want all of our classes to be by donation only. And, you can help by making a big difference in the lives of not just the LGBT community, but the whole entire community. If you know anything or don't know anything about our social programs, you can go to the NalandaLGBT.org, and it talks specifically about the homeless programs we are going to have, the substance abuse programs we're going to have, and the homeless programs we're going to have. Because if you don't, the majority of people suffering, they have all three of these issues going on, and if one, you've got to address all of them. What good does it do to give somebody, drug and alcohol counseling when they have no place to sleep and they have no food, to eat. And LA certainly has got a huge problem with this. And this is what we talk about a lot is when you give to Dharma, where you're getting, some sort of Dharma instruction or you're learning something. It helps you invest in your future if you do send a contribution. And the thing I want to really stress, though, it doesn't matter from if it's a penny to, $1,000. It's, the altruism in your heart that you're giving. That's the key to it. It's not the amount. It's how you, manifest in your heart and you express it. And our PayPal page is... you can find it on the Nalanda or GBT, the contribute. And we've had some people prefer to send checks, and our address is 535 South Curson, number 2D, Los Angeles, 90036. And I want to reiterate that all donations are tax deductible. You get the highest tax deduction rate allowed by law. And we want to make sure that everybody understands that this is tax deductible. So this is going to be the end of this discussion. I hope I haven't rambled on too much and strayed off of topics, that this has been informative for you. The next class we're going to do in a couple of weeks is going to be how to create your own practice. And we're going to be talking, this is not by any means, giving you direction from, a monk, lama, what have you, but it's a general, bare bones practice of Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And a lot of people like to try to do something like this while they're looking for a teacher. And I think it actually helps you find the teacher if you start doing a little bit of work ahead of that. So anyway, I thank you very much for spending some time with me, and I look forward to talk and see you in the next week or so. The week after next weekend. Have a good weekend.